Today's Bible reading is taken from Matthew chapter 26, verses 26 to 29. Now, as they were eating, Jesus took bread, and after blessing it, broke it and gave it to his disciples and said, "Take, eat, this is my body." And he took a cup, and when he had given thanks, he gave it to them, saying, "Drink of it, all of you, for this is my blood of the covenant, which is poured out for many for the forgiveness of sin. I tell you, I will not drink again of this fruit of the vine until the day when I drink it new with you in my Father's kingdom."
Morning. My assignment this morning is to reflect on the Lord's Supper. And as I was chewing on that idea of what could I say to this group of people, what could I offer, the thing that came to mind for me is I think as Christian leaders, as people in ministry, that the Lord's Supper is something that's vital to our walk. And I think that the Lord's Supper should hold significant value to every Christian life, and I think even more so in our lives. Yet, I think so often it can become just an exercise that we take part in, and we can let it lose its significance and value in our own walk. And as I was chewing on that, I began to think of what challenges do we face? Why does that happen? Why do I allow that to happen in my own walk, in my own life? And so I want to look at some of the challenges we face. I want to help us to remember, and I think in remembering that's going to humble our hearts, and I want us to allow all of that to renew our minds. And so I want to begin by talking about some of the challenges, at least that I face in my own life, and maybe this won't apply to you, but just being transparent, these are things that I struggle with. We've all been on airplanes, and some of you have taken way more flights and flown like millions of miles and have been way more places than I have. But you get on the airplane, and you go to your seat, you sit down, you buckle up, and you wait. And people file in, and you see them stow their bags, and they close the front door, and they tell you to turn your cell phones off, and half the people don't do that anyways. And then what happens? No, we're not there. No. Then all of a sudden, someone gets on there, and you hear, "Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to invite you to pay attention as we give you the following safety presentation." And how many of you already have your cell phones out or reading your book, or you look over and see the person next to you asleep? I'm not going to ask for hands, but I'm going to wager if you're anything like me, probably everybody in this room, because why? Why do we do that? This is important information they're trying to give us. They're telling us what's going to happen if all of a sudden the cabin depressurizes, or we're in West Texas, so I'm not worried as much about this one, if there's a water landing, which, by the way, the whole word landing in and of itself with water, we're not going to go there, but we tune out. We don't listen. And why is that? Because it's become monotonous. We've heard it so many times that it loses the significance that it should have, which is interesting because I was reading some articles from some airline safety people, and they were saying that that's become a huge problem for them, is that people are just tuned out. And I confess, I'm one of those people. I think we can face a similar problem when it comes to the Lord's Supper. I think when I was a brand new Christian, I used to look around Sunday mornings, and I was just so excited. To me, it was just this time of celebration because of the freedom that I had just received, and I was so joyful and excited, and I would look around and see people looking kind of somber. And in that season of my life, I didn't understand why they were somber, because to me, this was a time of celebration, of rejoicing. You know, I was free, and I was just embracing this new freedom I had found. And yet there was people somber, or sometimes even looking bored, and I didn't understand that, or just checked out. And as I got a little bit older in my faith, I began to chew on this thought of, there are people that have been faithful Christians for 30 years, 40 years, 50 years. How does that not become repetitive to them? How does that not become old to them? And so I don't think this is a new problem, but I think it's something that we as ministry-minded people can allow to become a problem for us. We can take for granted the sacred time that Jesus has instituted for us. I think the other problem that I face in my life is distraction, if I'm being real honest. And number one is right here, like just true confessions. Emails, notifications, all those things going on, my list of things to do because I'm a list maker. I can create my own distractions, and I confess that I've done that at times. I've been on my phone or on my iPad, and I haven't been tuned in. I haven't been making this space sacred as it was intended to be. But let's be honest, not everything is our own doing. There are things that are outside distractions. You're getting ready to preach. Is your mind in that moment? Are you focused? Some of these distractions aren't bad things. Sometimes there's those meetings after worship that you have to go to, and are you really focused in the moment? Are you thinking about those meetings? Or maybe things aren't going so well at home right now. Maybe you and your wife are not in the best place, or maybe paycheck's a little short and the bills are a little high this month, or fill in the blank for you. There are all kinds of things that can distract us, that can rob our hearts and minds of being present in this sacred time. And so I think these are the two areas, at least in my life, as I'm reflecting, that really can distract me from being fully present and fully engaged and receiving the blessing and benefit that was intended for us. So how do we deal with that? How do we overcome that? How can I overcome that, maybe, is what I'm going to answer. And the first way I thought of is just remembering. The beginning of this text that I was assigned, they're preparing to eat the Passover. And that just got me to thinking, what was the point of Passover? Why was this instituted? Why was it created? Deuteronomy 16 is going to spell it out for us. And I know we already know that, but I think it's so important that we let the text remind us. Observe the month of Abib and keep the Passover to the Lord your God. For in the month of Abib, the Lord your God brought you out of Egypt by night. And you shall offer the Passover sacrifice to the Lord your God from the flock or the herd at the place that the Lord will choose to make his name dwell there. You shall eat no leavened bread with it. 7 days you shall eat it with unleavened bread, the bread of affliction. For you came out of the land of Egypt in haste, that all the days of your life you may remember the day when you came out of the land of Egypt. The Israelites, and God's so smart, the Israelites needed to be reminded of what God had done for them. And we look at the history of Israel, at least when I look at it, and you could tell they forgot time and time and time again. Even just after they leave Egypt, after watching these miracles happen, and they're in the desert, and what do? They panic. They need food, they need water. They want Aaron to make an idol. All these things, and they just left. They just witnessed these amazing things. And yet here they are already forgetting who brought them out of slavery. And the truth is, we're not all that dissimilar from the Israelites. So often in my own life, I can take for granted what God brought me out of. And I think reflection is an important part of that. We too need to be reminded of our lives before Christ. I need to be reminded of who I was before Jesus rescued me. I need to remember who I was and the ugliness and the grossness of my life. Not to glory in that and not to beat myself up over that, but to appreciate what God did for me. If I don't remember who I was, I can't appreciate what he's done. And I think that's so important. And I think if I will stop and remember who I was and what he's done, it's going to keep me grounded in him. It's going to keep the sacred time that he's created, because it reminds me every week, oh yeah, I had to be rescued. I was a sinful man. I was lost. I was a slave, but no longer. And I think that's so important for us to not take that for granted. But if I'm honest, I do sometimes. I've gotten so comfortable in my Christianity that I forget the goodness of God and the awful price he paid for me. And I think that's the next thing that we need to reflect on is the price he paid. And sometimes I think it can be really easy to just let that be words on a page or something that happened a long time ago. But I want us to go back to Matthew 26. And I want to reread the text that was already read. Now as they were eating, Jesus took bread, and after blessing it, broke it and gave it to the disciples and said, "Take, eat, this is my body." And he took a cup, and when he had given thanks, he gave it to them, saying, "Drink of it, all of you, for this is my blood of the covenant, which is poured out for many for the forgiveness of sins." Jesus died for us, and we know that. There's this part of us, we know that in our brains. But Jesus didn't just die. It wasn't just neat and done, and he just died. He went through so much more than that. And I think that is an important thing for me to remember in my life is Jesus was betrayed. And right before this section, he tells them that Judas is going to betray him. And then Judas does. He sells him for 30 pieces of silver. And I think one of the things I'm trying to challenge myself with in this is is to remember the humanity of Jesus and remember the suffering he went through, not just at the cross, but beforehand, being betrayed by one of the people in his inner circle and trying to imagine the emotion and knowing that that's coming and allowing it to still happen because he's looking forward, knowing where he has to get to. And he still endured that and still allowed that to happen. And then being rejected by the people. Instead, they choose a murderer, an insurrectionist over him. And Peter denying him. And knowing all these things and experiencing them. And then the physical pain of dealing with scourgings and having the crown put on his head and the robe ripped off his back and all of that, and the mockery of the soldiers and the mockery on the cross and enduring the pain and suffering of the crucifixion. And then in Matthew 27, he says this, my God, why have you forsaken me? I don't fully understand what that must have been like for Jesus. And that's one of those things that I don't comprehend fully. But Jesus went through that for me. He endured that and had those feelings of being forsaken by God to the point of crying out loud and saying that. I can't allow that to become mundane in my life. We can't allow that to become mundane in our lives. We can't take for granted the suffering that Jesus endured for us, for me in my life. And I think if we remember who we were and we remember the pain and the suffering he went through, I think this can help me to renew my mind. Because as I think of myself, I could have a really terrific week. Jesus still died for me. I could do everything right. I could have great classes and great conversations. I could do things just the way that Corey wanted to, and he doesn't have to correct my spelling or grammar like usual. I could just, you know the week I'm talking about, the week where everything goes right. Weirdly enough, everything it could be the most fantastic week ever. Jesus still died for me. My value has not increased at all. It is fixed to the cross. And I could have the worst week ever, and everything could go wrong. The tires could be flat, the bank account could be short, the dog could escape, the lesson I delivered was flat and terrible. Everything could be just absolutely rotten. You know the kind of week I'm talking about, the no good, rotten week that you just wondered why you got out of bed that week at all. My value is still the same, still fixed at the cross. And then there's just every other week in between. Guess what? My value is still fixed to the cross. And so my value doesn't change. God determined that. And I think that's so important because when I'm having a really great week, if I forget that, I become prideful. I become arrogant. I think way more of myself than I should. And the opposite is true. If I'm having a no good or rotten week, I could just wonder what value I have and why I even bother. And I could just have those meh weeks where it's not really great, not really terrible. In all of that, the great thing is my value is fixed. My worth doesn't change. It doesn't go up. It doesn't go down. It doesn't go sideways. It stays the same for eternity. And that is so important because life is going to be up and down, and you all know that. I'm not telling you anything new. But what doesn't change is how much God loves me and how my value doesn't change to him. And I think that's so important for my journey and for me. I think the next way that this can renew our minds is when we think about the body. I love my Christian family, but we know that we're humans. We're full of flaws, and we can be selfish, and that doesn't stop at the door Sunday mornings or Wednesdays or any other time that we're together. We still bring our flaws to the table. We're broken. That's why we needed the blood of Christ in the first place. But sometimes, if I'm being real honest, it's easy for me to look at other people and forget Jesus loved them just as much as he loves me. They have value too. They have the same value that I have. Their value is fixed at the cross. And we're in the same boat together, all trying to get to the same place together. And so do I see people for the problems and the frustrations that they bring to me or cause me? Or do I see them as fellow heirs, as fellow children, as their value being fixed, as worth Jesus dying on the cross? Because if I do, that should and has to influence and cause me to treat them that way. And if it doesn't, that's a me problem. But I think the sacred time of communion can renew my mind and can remind me of the value that they have too. And finally, I think this time can renew our mindset when we look at the world. We have this hope. We have this body full of people that have this hope. And then there's a world that desperately needs Jesus, desperately needs the hope that we have. And how do I look at the world? Do I have empathy? Do I have sympathy? Do I care? Or do I just look at them as those other people? When I'm at the grocery store and that person is taking forever in line, how do I see that person? Do I see them as someone needing Jesus? Do I see them as being valued by the King? And do I treat them that way, or do I roll my eyes and make a big deal? When that person sits at the stoplight for 2.5 seconds longer than they should, what do I think about that person? When that person is incredibly rude to me for no good reason and in my face, how do I view that person? See, it's really easy to sit in this place surrounded by us and to say, man, we need to love people. We need to treat them like Jesus values them. It's super simple to have that conversation in here. Sometimes it's a whole different ballgame out there. But if I'm constantly coming to this time and allowing it to renew my mind, to remind me of the goodness of God in my life and seeing the goodness of God in your lives, then how can I not want everyone out there to have that same goodness in their life? And how doesn't that impact and influence and cause me to act differently than it would otherwise? I think the Lord's Supper is an incredible opportunity that God has given me every week to be humbled, to be renewed, and to be rekindled. And I can't allow this sacred time to become monotonous or to allow myself to be distracted by the things going on. We've got to remember who we were, what Jesus did, and the goodness and grace that we receive daily now. And I think the Lord's Supper is such a pivotal time for that. And God in his intelligence and wisdom knew that we are going to need to be reminded often. Just like the Israelites needed to be reminded often that God brought them out of slavery, I too need to be reminded often that he brought me out of slavery. And I cannot allow this time to become anything less than what God intended it to be, which is a sacred time to connect with him, to be renewed and reminded by him. And so my encouragement is allow communion to remind you of who you were and what God did for you. Allow it to renew your mind as you think about your own life and the lives of others around you. And allow it to rekindle that fire to share that goodness and grace with others. Because we have received so much. How can we not go give it to others?